Hello, welcome to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. I'm your host for this episode, Ted Gotsch, and today we will be speaking once again to Katie Dzurec, the Academy's Director of State Public Policy Outreach, about the organization's work and interactions at the just completed National Association of Insurance Commissioners Spring 2026 meeting in San Diego. Katie plays an active role engaging the NAIC across practice areas for the Academy, not just at the group's triannual meetings, but all year long. She's the perfect choice to give us the lowdown on everything that happened at the meeting in what is known as, at least to the San Diego Visitors Bureau, as America's finest city, both during sessions, during the day, as well as a few select social events at night. So Katie, welcome back from SoCal. You're like the returning champion of this podcast, but besides what was almost certainly better weather, what were some of the top line takeaways from the latest NAIC meeting?
So I'll start with the 2026 priorities. So Commissioner White, as the new NAIC president, set out his priorities for 2026, and we definitely saw those come to fruition during the meeting. Priority 1 is enhancing capital investment framework, which we always see in the many exposures and re-exposures coming from LATIF. But in his opening speech, he also called out life products and the risks they're taking on and strategies they're relying on to maintain adequate reserves. So we're pretty sure the Life Practice Council will remain busy with comment letters and updates on the work they've been doing. It's not different from how they always operate, and they always do a great job. And then on top of that, another priority is increasing resilience, which then gets at access and affordability, which is one of our major issues in public policy. And then they're looking at leading the way on AI. So we all know we can't keep up with the pace of AI change, but Commissioner White talked about that AI use really needs to be transparent, fair, and used in ways that hold up to scrutiny. So we're seeing that play out as well.
Okay. Well, those are really important issues and obviously ones sort of broad in scope. So how are regulators thinking about those priorities when it comes to their day-to-day work?
Yeah, so we heard a lot from the commissioners and their staff in terms of updates on reports that are coming out from their respective states and the work they're doing. But there were also a number of presentations from stakeholders to the regulators all week long. Consumer liaisons from health and property and casualty offered some really great insights into affordability and accessibility in their respective areas. There were really detailed presentations on prescription drug formularies and transparency, as well as a presentation on drug discount cards and prescription assistance programs, conversations about controlling hospital costs and work that's being done by state-based exchanges and the tools they're using to improve affordability. And then we also heard about long-term care insurance fraud and some efforts to address that. On the property and casualty side, there was extensive discussion about liability insurance for nonprofits, and there's a new working group and a study in the works. So affordability strategies and conversations were well covered across the board. On the AI side, Dorothy Andrews presented on how to operationalize the NAIC's AI model bulletin, and more states are adopting that bulletin. And her presentation was talking about possible approaches for implementation for those states that do adopt the bulletin. And then there was a whole panel discussion on best practices for AI governance. And then during H committee, the committee heard a presentation on insurance artificial intelligence trends, including agentic AI applications. So that was sort of really interesting to tease apart AI and the agentic AI and how those differ and what that means. So a lot of in the weeds presentations and just a lot of really great discussion around that. And then, of course, there are a number of white papers and reports and studies that are either going to be drafted, that are in the process of being drafted now, or have been finalized and they were adopted at this meetings. So regulators just have tons of resources and continue to have a need for more objective information from independent sources.
Well, that sounds on par for what both NAIC and the Academy does. What did they share exactly?
Well, so from the Academy side, we got to share some preliminary results from our RBC impairment project. The research team, Steve Jackson, our director for research, presented in the 3 RBC working groups at Capital Adequacy Task Force and then at the RBC Model Governance Task Force, giving an overview of our preliminary findings in the research we're doing as we begin to move toward the next phase on that research. And people are very excited about what he reported and sort of what comes next. As usual, we had presentations for the actuarial task force members. So professionalism shared some updates on the feedback and requests that they've been receiving and then their plans for 2026, including revisions to and new ASOPs. And then public policy got to highlight our recent work in property and casualty. We gave a quick overview of the latest issue brief from the Homeowners Insurance Task Force, the Filling the Coverage Gap issue brief. That was very well received and very much appreciated by members of the task force and by the NAIC staff. They're looking forward to more follow on from that. And then at HADIF, Annette James, our health VP, was given some time to identify and then delve into some of our priorities for 2026 in the Health Practice Council, very much in line on the affordability and accessibility track, actually for both health and P&C. And with a lot of great questions and interest from the regulators. So we know that they're hearing us, they're looking forward to hearing from us. So those updates I think have been great, and we're looking forward to moving in a more substantive direction with those updates. On the life side, there were several updates on projects that Life Practice Council committees and subcommittees have been working on. So again, we're sort of right there in offering resources for regulators. And as I caught up with people between meetings, I was able to share some of the Academy work products that are coming down the pipeline. And commissioners and NAIC staff and other stakeholders are really excited for what's coming next.
Well, that's a lot across all the different practice areas. I just wondered if there was anything surprising or new that you heard about.
It's actually kind of funny because, the NAIC is pretty well scripted, but there were definitely some things that were kind of exciting for insurance wonks like us. I'm sure people sort of knew they were happening, but because they were in the agendas. But Castif has a new charge to draft a white paper that will explain how homeowners insurance rates are regulated across states. And this stems from, I'm going to say, allegation that there's cross-state subsidization of catastrophic losses. So NAIC staff presented some background on where this charge was coming from, and she referenced a staff report on climate-driven insurance crises that Senator Whitehouse released at the end of 2024. And this was after a number of Senate Budget Committee hearings that went on through 2024 on the same topic.
And just to be clear for listeners, Senator Whitehouse wrote on, this is the U.S. Senate. Anyway,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
No, well, I think that's a good point because this is the kind of thing that makes state regulators really nervous because we have federal players starting to get involved in what is a state. It's been given to the states as something they are meant to regulate and oversee. So that a senator at the federal level is having hearings on this or had hearings on this and put out a report on this has people wondering, like, what's going on? And sort of more alarming is that there's this underlying assumption that rate regulation at the state level is part of the problem. There's sort of rate regulation is being portrayed as opaque and non-transparent. So the purpose of the white paper is really to help explain rate regulation and then use data to explain the macroprudential concerns that have been raised. NAIC wants to get good information out there to the folks who sort of don't believe that rate review is in fact transparent. So they're heading in that direction. And that, at the NAIC, that's grounds for fireworks. The D committee is also working on making changes to their market conduct exam handbook and even possibly going so far as to just throw out the entire handbook and start from scratch. That was thrown out as an option, which it was kind of funny because Commissioner White sort of hinted at this during his remarks at the opening session, because one of the priorities is enhancing data architecture, predictive analysis, and market analysis. I don't know that I would have guessed that this was what he was thinking in that priority, because the market regulation handbook gets updated every year. It's multiple volumes, it's thousands of pages. And the academy doesn't typically pay a lot of attention to the D committee and sort of the market regulation side of things. But I think this is a good time for the academy to sort of start paying more attention. In my role as a regulator in past lives, I've been in the seat, I've been the examiner who was told, this is what the actuaries gave us. And I would receive that information and sort of look at what information was given to us and the explanation that we got from the company, and the explanation literally being that's what the actuaries told us. And I didn't really know what to do with that. So one of my goals as all of this is happening around the D committee is that I would like to make sure that the academy and the actuaries are engaging with the D committee and opening up a dialogue so that they have a better understanding of what it means when someone says this is what the actuaries gave us, and also what it doesn't mean. Because, we have professionalism standards and we have our ASOPs and the USQS that has meaning. But I also want for the academy, for our members, for academy staff to understand, what's going on, what's being given to the actuaries, what's being asked of the actuaries that prompts the output they're providing in that setting. So I think there's room here to fill some knowledge gaps and to get some basic information shared back and forth. It's an important thing going forward, and I think it will help with the overall priority that Commissioner White set out, that we want to enhance market analysis. So we have opportunity here that I don't think we had before. There were a lot of updates on the AI evaluation tool that's being rolled out. The updates were given in several of the sessions that I attended. And the key takeaways there are that the pilot program for the evaluation tool has started. States have started to choose the companies that they're using the tool with and the context in which they're using the tool. I thought it was interesting that it is mostly being used for life and P&C companies in the pilot, with only a couple of health companies in the mix. So we'll need to continue to watch how this goes, because AI is used for underwriting and claims processing and so many things that can impact cost and affordability and accessibility. So whether it's direct or whether it's, a downstream impact, this definitely is going to stay on our radar. I think actually it was it was kind of funny because in a couple of conversations, it had to be clarified that the AI tool is a Word document. Tool was really confusing people in the AI context. So they clarified that the tool is a list of questions designed to be used in succession. And the goal of those questions is to help regulators understand how and when companies are using AI. And then when they do use it, what governance looks like for each of the use cases. And I think in one of the conversations, I think at Castiff, Vermont, which is one of the pilot states, they gave a good example of how they're incorporating the tool into their financial exam cycle. And then they will start using that same tool in targeted market conduct exams later in the year. And then they've also, outside of the exam space, they've started asking companies just the first set of questions about what AI are you using? And they're just asking that during their annual conversations with issuers. The companies come in once a year, they have a conversation. And so now one of the agenda items is the first part of this tool. They've gotten feedback, but so far, so good on the use of the tool from Vermont's perspective. And then the last thing I would bring up, it's not new, it's not surprising, but I flagged earlier this year that the Natural Catastrophe Risk and Resilience Task Force was pending adoption. And it's funny because it's a new name for an existing task force, but they removed it's the Climate Resilience Task Force, but they removed climate from the name and replaced it with natural catastrophe risk. But they've adopted like a whole new set of charges. So again, sort of a replacement of an existing task force. What it does now is we officially have a task force that serves as the primary coordinating body for regulatory actions, engagement, communication, and discussions related to natural catastrophe risk and resilience. So this one's obviously going to stay on our
Yeah.
radar and be part of the RIMFRIC and PNC conversations, but also isn't necessarily excluded from the life, health, and retirement conversations as we go forward.
That's an excellent point because obviously, right, how it affects really all practice areas. Okay, well, let's dive into some of the practice areas. Speaking of which, specifically, I guess, starting off in the health arena.
Yeah. So in health, of course, the word of the day is affordability. And we heard that during our Hill visits. So this is not a surprise that we're seeing it at the state level too. I mentioned earlier the presentations on pharmacy and long term care insurance, but we also have senior issues really trying to dig into the Medigap birthday rule and Medigap for people under 65. They are trying to get their hands around long term care riders and life insurance products. So at the Academy, we're actually working on developing a cross practice project around the long term care riders, which are health products, being attached to life insurance products. So that's definitely something that we're exploring. We're sort of trying to set the parameters for how we talk about it. And I think one of the issues is people don't really know how to talk about it because it's two product types living in a single space. And because it's two product types and two different lines of business, there's a potential for different certificates of authority to come into play, which means there are different requirements that come into play. And it's either super easy or super complicated. And I think we all need to just figure out how to talk about it so that we can talk about it. The ERISA working group has a new charge and a new name, and it involves really exploring alternative health coverage. So, looking at level funded plans, looking at short term limited duration insurance, and really covering topics that our health practice council has been tackling across many of the committees. So, as that working group looks to identify their focus areas, they've asked for feedback. And so, we're hoping to have some good resources and some good information to bring to that conversation as they move forward.
Let me take a moment to remind listeners that you are listening to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries, where we talk to Academy volunteers, leaders, and friends of the Academy about what excites them, both professionally and as an Academy volunteer. On April 16th, the Academy will host a virtual health summit, broadening the focus. The summit will explore actuarial insights on improving healthcare access and affordability by broadening the focus beyond ROI and shifting to a more holistic view of value. Register now at actuary.org to be a part of the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to Actuary Voices on your preferred podcast platform. Now back to the conversation with Katie Dzurec.
Okay, well, how about casualty?
Yeah, in casualty, it's pretty much the same, similar to health, but also the same kind of thing that we've been hearing all along. Affordability and accessibility have been top of mind for a while. During the opening session, the mayor of San Diego, Todd Gloria, spoke, and he is the VP of the Conference of Mayors. And one of the things he talked about was that affordable housing and the role insurance plays in the affordability conversation is a priority for the Conference of Mayors. So definitely somebody I'll be getting in touch with soon for our PNC folks. And then also in the affordability and accessibility space, the focus is really right now on that white paper on the rate review. But then there was also the third party data and models registry. They've sort of reached consensus around building the registry. They're trying to wrap their heads around who's providing data services and what data models they're using for pricing and underwriting. And so the first step around this data registry and building out the data registry is going to be focusing on governance and creating consistent national framework for pricing and underwriting. So we'll certainly be paying attention there. And then another part of the opening session, Commissioner Lara talked about needing to rethink everything we thought we knew about risk and resilience. And this has to do with the mega and giga fires that have been occurring, not just in California, but
Okay.
across the country. And so what he talked about is rebuilding smarter and modernizing our tools, including the pricing tools and the underwriting tools. And he talked about a focus on transparency, consumer protections, and fortification. And and he isn't the only one talking about this, right? And so it's coming up everywhere, and it will definitely have a ripple effect. And so we'll see it in P&C spaces immediately. We'll start to see it in RIMFRIC, and then we'll see it, as we talked about before, through health, life, and retirement as well.
And speaking of life, what were some of the top line life topics that came up?
Yeah, I mean, so the life stuff doesn't change a whole lot. So the LPC will continue to have its work cut out for them. But I think people who are engaged with our Life Practice Council know that the priorities for that council include complex assets and offshore reinsurance and sort of terms that came up during opening session. They came out throughout the latest meeting. They were brought up in the RBC conversations. So with life, we're not necessarily talking about affordability and accessibility in the way we think about them for PNC and health. I mean, those are our gatekeeper insurances. You can't drive a car without auto insurance. You can't get a mortgage without homeowners insurance. But in life, we're really looking at, and the priority of the NAIC is that the asset risk profiles are changing, and that's pushing it into the priority space. So NAIC for 2026 is focusing on enhancing capital and investment framework, because if insurers don't have adequate reserves to back the obligations that they have, then there isn't going to be a life market to speak of. So that's sort of like life has this sort of similar feed as health and PNC, but from a different space. But it's not an unfamiliar space for sure.
And I'm sure, what are the implications for REMFREC with all of it?
Yeah, so RIMFRIC houses our international committee, our AI and data science work, solvency and reinsurance, and it's across all the practice areas. So RIMFRIC is really going to be the muster point for these conversations, I think, specifically the AI conversations and implementation as this tool gets rolled out and gets used and we hear feedback. AMAWIG, the aggregation method working group, is working on their US group solvency regulation, and they're talking about adoption in June with referral to the G committee for approval. So that's going to be on the RIMFRIC radar. And then as the RBC conversation continues, the Academy's cross practice RBC task force will be more actively engaged this year than last year. And the research committee will be moving into the next phase of their impairment RBC research project. So the committees under RIMFRIC are going to continue to have work to do and work to monitor and hopefully more comments to be written.
Right. Well, that's a lot of business from all the different areas that we talk about. Obviously, that's what the NAIC meetings are about business. But there's always some downtime where Academy members and friends get to relax. Can you tell us a little bit about any Academy sponsored events?
Yeah, well, so we did our reception and dinner after the LATIF and HATIF meetings, and Lori and her team do a fantastic job. And this meeting was really no different. The venue was packed. We had great food, great conversation. I think the standout for this one was our bartender he was truly an artist, Ted. Like it was fun watching him pour a Diet Coke. It was on par with like Tom Cruise
I was
in
going to say, is this like a cocktail?
Cocktail.
The movie Cocktail? Okay.
Yeah, but this guy was like 27 times more cool than Tom Cruise. So it was pretty great. There was no lawn bowling, which we did have in Minneapolis, and I think that one really sticks out for people. But like I said, Laura and her team just keep raising the bar for these fantastic opportunities to just connect, to unwind. Like we can nerd out about insurance, but we also get a chance to talk about other things. March Madness was starting, so we all watched the end of a couple of nail biters and bracket busters. So we had fun there. I know they'll have something fantastic in store for us when we head to the Buckeye State this summer, for sure.
Right. And so you're previewing the next meeting, you're there, but speaking of which, just looking at summer meeting in Columbus, Ohio, what is a lot of topics you discussed here? How many of them are going to transfer over, to that summer meeting?
Yeah, I think definitely the rate review white paper. They put it on a fast track. So I expect to see updates I think they're meeting on a weekly basis at the regulator level to be doing drafting between now and August. So we're keeping an eye out for opportunities to provide comment in the interim. And I've already talked with the NAIC staff and the CASTIF chair to make sure they know we're available. Please reach out. There will definitely be more reports on the AI evaluation tool pilot. I'm really looking forward to seeing what companies and regulators have to say about their experience, 6 months in. I think it'll be really interesting and it will help us sort of shape, okay, how should we be thinking about it now that we know how their tool? I think obviously the RBC Model Governance Task Force is moving into their next phase. We adopted principles in December and now it's time to kind of keep moving forward in the conversation and we're staying right there in that conversation and we'll see what comes up in August. And summertime is when health insurance rate review and form review is happening at the state level. And it's also when the Health Practice Council puts out the premium drivers paper. And so there will inevitably be some meaty conversation around what's going to go into and what we're thinking about for 2027 as the affordability conversation continues. So I think there will be plenty going on. And I think the other thing too that came up, there will be this new task force on liability insurance for nonprofits. So that task force is forming now. And so they're another group that I think is going to be moving on a pretty quick timeline. So it'll be interesting to see what they talk about in August. And that's under C committee.
Okay, well, something to look forward to, certainly. Katie, thanks so much for this great conversation we've had here. We end every episode with our guests answering a question left by our previous guest and then leaving a question for our next guest. So, our last guest asked, what is the enduring value of long term thinking in actuarial work? And how do you protect that perspective in your day to day role?
I kind of love this question because whether it was meant to or not, like it's an ideal setup for our Health Equity Committee's Broadening the Focus Summit, which is coming up on April 16th. And we have a really fantastic lineup. So I'm super excited about it. So hopefully I'm taking the spirit of the question the way it was intended to go. With broadening the focus and with thinking about sort of the long-term thinking in actuarial work. We have to level set that health insurance products and rates are really largely set on an annual basis. In the individual and small group market, major medical form and rate filing happens every year for 1 year products. It's an annual cycle. And so the services that are provided to enrollees within a benefit year are the focus. And because of that 1 year focus, we get a little bit limited on how we can value things. It's really hard to quantify the full value of getting someone to quit smoking, for example, because of the value of quitting smoking, like medically, builds year over year in the person's health profile. And then it's even harder to quantify things like, the value of well managed mental and behavioral health. You can quantify if things go wrong, but if someone's got well managed mental health, that value ripples out, like, and positively affects physical health. It positively affects sleep, families and coworkers and communities. Like, you have all this really great benefit for managing your mental health, right? But if we stagnate in a space that's focused on just the immediate, if we measure just on the immediate, we start to lose the plot. And so in the broadening the focus work, we're talking about a holistic approach that's intended to get us thinking about, upstream factors, what's pushing people into high utilization or high cost situation. And it's sort of asking like what's happening right now that we can address that will affect, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, right? We're pushing beyond claims as data points for impact assessment. And we're looking at what else, what's going on in society and how is it better this year than it was 5 years ago because, some critical change was made within a community. And we're thinking about how to project the cost of inaction on a longer term basis, 3 to 5 years out, not just the end of this plan year. And so I think the enduring value of taking a long term approach and thinking long term is just like Commissioner Lara said, challenging what we thought we knew, rethinking what we thought we knew, and as Academy staff and in my role here, I get to push for our volunteers to think about cross committee and cross council collaboration. I get to push, Academy staff and challenge them to connect the dots and rethink what we thought we knew to be true by challenging where the conversation is headed next, even after we push the publish button on a work product. So that's my thinking on the enduring value of long-term thinking in this work.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And now it's your turn to have a question that you want to leave for our next guest. It really can be about anything, personal, professional, or on a broader topic.
So I guess in so many presentations, we remind everybody about the Academy and what we do. And we flag that the Academy puts out literally hundreds of resources every year. And so I'd love to ask a multi-part question for the next interviewee. How do you use work products that the Academy puts out, and how can we make those work products better for you, for your colleagues, for others who might use them? So that's my question.
Okay. That's definitely will be thought-provoking for the next person. That's great. Katie, thank you for all your insights. And listeners, if you'd like to learn more about everything that took place at the NAIC Spring meeting, head over to the Actuarial Sound blog on the website, actuary.org, where Katie recapped the event. My name is Ted Gotsch, and I am pleased to have had the opportunity to host this episode of Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. Visit our website at actuary.org to learn more about all we do here at the Academy. You can also follow us at X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast at your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.